Could you tell us who you are?
I'm Art Bennett.
And when and where were you born?
I was born in Grenville County, near a village called Spencerville, on March the 29th, 1924.
And were you a junior farmer at all?
For a short time, I was playing in a rural ball league, and there was a junior farmer club in that township, and they decided to enter the field day at Kempville, the one for Eastern Ontario, and they needed a third baseman, so they signed me up.
And from there you went to meetings and...
Didn't go to very many meetings because shortly after that I started back to school, and it was steady at a two-year course at Kempville, and if you did well enough there, they would let you into second year at Guelph, even though you didn't have grade 13. So that's what happened. I finished at Kempville, and the principal wrote a letter to the registrar at Guelph recommending me as a second year student. So I went to Guelph and took animal science and graduated in 1951.
And from
but
there...
the reason I was quite an age before I got involved was that at 17 I finished grade 12. I went west on the harvest excursion, and on the way home stopped in at the recruiting center in Winnipeg and enlisted. Well, they said come back when you're 18. So in the meantime, my father had an accident and broke his leg very badly. So I stayed home to help run the farm until I eventually went back to the recruiting office and joined the Air Force. Took air crew training, pre-air crew training at Brandon, at the college in Brandon. They decided they didn't need any more air crew at that point, so we were offered a transfer to the Army. And I took basic training again in the Army and volunteered for the Parachute Corps, and went to Shiloh in Manitoba and took the training and got my wings as a paratrooper, and just in time for the war to be over. So I got a discharge and came back to the farm for a short time, and then started in at Kempville. And went on to Guelph and graduated in 1951. So at the end of third year, there was a recruiting team from the Ministry of Agriculture and Food looking for summer assistants. So I applied and was fortunate to get selected from the large class that we had and sent to Durham County as a summer assistant. So I worked there for the summer with the late Ed Summers, who was a long time well-established, wonderful ag rep who had a tremendous youth program, particularly 4-H. Was a junior farmer club. Back to Guelph early to go practice for the livestock judging team. So I was really not very much involved with the junior farmers in Durham County. When I finished at Guelph, the recruiting team was there again from the ministry, and I applied and was fortunate to get hired. And my first posting was in Waterloo County, and they had quite an active county club in Waterloo with some good programs, drama and sports, and regular meetings. I wasn't very much involved, but attended some of their meetings and gave advice when I was asked. Coached a team for the interclub competitions, the intercollegiate competitions at the Royal Fair. And before the year was up, I got a letter in the mail saying I was transferred to Halton and Peel counties, working as an assistant ag rep in the two counties. Almost left the service because I think I must have done something wrong to be transferred after a year. Took a couple of interviews. I had gotten to know the Holstein Fieldman really well, and he said, "Oh, you should go manage a herd someplace." So I took a couple of interviews, but I thought, well, the only job I ever applied for was with the Ministry of Agriculture and Food, and I decided to stick it out and went to Halton and Peel, half-time in each, 8 4-H clubs in each county, 5 junior farmer clubs in each county. So I had lots of chance to get involved in the youth programs. Was there for 5 years, and I think fairly successful as a youth worker. I got a call one day from Mr. Hilliard, who had been the long-time Secretary-Treasurer of the Junior Farmer Association, who had just been promoted to direct the extension branch, which was the ag reps and the ag engineers and the fruit and vegetable specialists were in the branch at that time. Wondering if I would be interested in being the Secretary-Treasurer of the Junior Farmer Association in Ontario. The ministry provided that service to the organization. So I went in for an interview and was offered the job.
What year was that?
That was in 1957. No, sorry, 19. Get my date straight here.
You're right, Art, 57.
Yes, in 1957. I had been in Halton and Peel for 5 years at that point. So 57. So I served as the Secretary-Treasurer for 7 years.
What were the most exciting, significant, or interesting events that happened to junior farmers during your years as Secretary-Treasurer?
Well, there were a lot of the same things that had been going on. There was quite a bit of emphasis on debating and sports and drama. Regular winter get-togethers for the presidents and secretaries and officers of the clubs for training. I think those were very important and quite successful. There was a large sports event in southwestern Ontario at Ridgetown, one at Belleville and one at Kempville, and then the large one at Guelph, which was for sort of the provincial one. Those were well attended, lots of participants, great competition, and great way for people to know each other, and usually fairly friendly and good sportsmanship. Once in a while people would get a bit carried away and sign people up, and I didn't get very excited about that because I had been signed up to play ball in the first place. Had tremendous presidents in that time, and you'll be interviewing them and they can give their side of the story. They've been lifelong lifelong friends. 3 or 4 of them in particular we meet at least yearly as some kind of a function, as a kind of a get-together.
Is there any
We
significant?
had 2 or 3 things that were very interesting for me, that had been started before I became the Secretary Treasurer. One was a soil and land use tour, and the head of the Soils Department in Guelph would join up with the Secretary Treasurer, and we to take a busload of junior farmers gathered from one from each county that wished to participate, and we would go to a section of the province and line up a program through the agriculture representative to study the soil types and the cropping programs and this type of thing. So we lived with that group for a week, and that group got to know each other really well, and it was a great learning experience for me as the part-time leader of the group as well. Another really interesting thing that occurred annually was a livestock management tour. And this was mainly for the dairy industry, and again there'd be a busload of junior farmers drawn from whatever 30 or 40 counties, one from each county, spend a week visiting farms in a particular section of the province, and learning the management systems on those farms. The farmers were very generous with their information, and again you ended up with a group that had become friends and really keen to learn all they could about the dairy industry. And it's interesting to follow the careers of some of those people. I was particularly interested in, well, all the livestock programs in the province, but dairy especially. Back when I was in Halton County, we had experimented with a junior herdsman club. 18 young men who were working on their home farms, or 4 of them had actually started their own farming operation. We had monthly meetings with speakers from the university and specialists talking about housing and breeding programs and management. So this was a good background to have when I was working with this livestock management tour annually for the 7 years that I was the Secretary Treasurer. So got to see a lot of excellent farms and wonderful cooperation from those farmers, and again, there are at least 2 of those people who went along to be master breeders, or received master breeder shields from the Holstein Association. Many of them presidents of their milk committees and so on and so on. So wonderful experience for me, and I think for the people who participated.
Was there any change in direction of junior farmers during your tenure?
No, I don't think much changed. There was a slight increase in membership in that time, and I think it was because we had outstanding presidents, and we had programs that appealed to people, and a lot of emphasis on training the leaders in workshops on parliamentary procedure and programming and how to develop good programs and interesting programs.
What tasks did you have to perform as Secretary Treasurer for JFAO?
Well,
What were some of your duties?
We had a budget, an allocation from the ministry, and you had to be careful that that was spent wisely and stay within the budget. We didn't have to go out and raise money to have programs because the ministry allocated the budget, and we had tremendous cooperation from OAC, from Ridgetown campus, from Kempville campus, and on the campus at Guelph, the Dean of Men, who was a great sports person, John Eccles, and the head of the athletics department, Bill Mitchell. Just anything you asked for, you got. Going to have a sports day, they would arrange the umpires. So it just had so much cooperation from those people. At Ridgetown, there were Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, Pop Wilson and Mrs. Wilson. Same thing. Debating competition, they'd help with the judge, get the judges, or maybe even judge themselves. If you wanted a sports day, everything you wanted was there. So it was, and the same at Kempville. So it was really easy to organize these events and with the cooperation of all of these people. And it would be the Secretary-Treasurer's role to make those arrangements. But when the event took place, the Secretary-Treasurer was in the background because the President or whoever was in charge of that committee was front row center. And I liked very much to stay in the background and watch those people do their job so well.
What do you feel was your most significant contribution to Junior Farmers Association or to Junior Farmers members?
Well, I don't know. I think we should ask other people that question. If I had to mention one thing, I think I was a good organizer and a good recruiter of the right people to take on the leadership roles and a good coach to make sure that the talents that were there were used in full. I think I can say that this skill in organizing sort of followed me through my career. For example, when Canada hosted the International Farm Management Congress, I was given the task of making the physical arrangements and developing the program, inviting the speakers, and so on. And again, when it came time for the function to take place, I was not on the platform at all. I didn't chair any of the sessions. We had other people to do all of those things. when Mr. Stewart was the Minister of Agriculture, which was most of the time in my career, and just a wonderful person who had grown up in junior farmers himself and knew what it was like, what it was about, and wanted to make sure that the junior farm organization was strong and well funded. So that made it easier for the Secretary-Treasurer. He decided agriculture was kind of in the doldrums, that he wanted to have a conference to bring farm leaders and representatives from every county and district in the province together to discuss what could be done to improve the fate of agriculture, the role of agriculture at the time. So guess who got asked to develop the program, make the physical arrangements, get the farm leaders there? And at that conference, he ended up appointing a committee. Some of the harshest critics and some of the brightest minds were formed into a committee, and they spent a year interviewing, meeting, discussing, and at the end of that year they issued a report called The Challenge of Abundance. And the minister wanted to have that discussed and ratified because it talked about the future direction of the ministry. So guess who was asked to organize that conference? At another time, Mr. Hilliard, when he was directing the branch, decided that there were too many farm accidents in the province and decided to have a survey of farm accidents over a 2 or 3 year period, and developed a report on that, and decided wanted to have a conference with representatives from all the counties and districts of the province to discuss what action could be taken. So guess who was asked to organize that conference? So I think if my organizing ability sort of carried on through, those are just 3 examples of things that had happened. The final one I might mention is when Mr. Henderson was the minister, he decided he wanted to have a conference to look at the future of agriculture. So again, we organized the program and the physical facilities, got the delegates through the county offices with the ag reps, and had a wonderful get-together for 3 or 4 days, and looking at the future of the future role of the Ministry of Agriculture and Food.
Where was your office during this time?
At the headquarters of the Ministry of Agriculture and Food in Toronto. We were in 3 different locations. We started out in one of the government buildings, and then we were in leased facilities, 2 other locations, both in downtown Toronto. And I was living in Oakville and commuting to Toronto for 25 years.
And how many were with you? How many worked in your staff?
When I first went in to be the Secretary-Treasurer, there was a director of the branch, Mr. Hilliard. Gordon Bennett was in charge of the 4-H program, and I was working in the junior farmer program. So really there was a supervisor of the Fruit and Vegetable Extension Service who didn't have his office in Toronto. He was at Vineland. And there was a supervisor of the Ag Engineering Service, and he had an office in the engineering department at the University of Guelph. So that was, and then there was a director of for Northern Ontario, whose office was in the headquarters at Extension Branch headquarters in Toronto. So that was the size of our staff.
Did anyone report directly to you?
Not at that stage.
Okay.
But not when I was Secretary Treasurer. I ended up directing the branch, and we were all colleagues at that time. I preferred to use the term colleague rather than employer, employee type of thing. It was my style of administration.
You talked about a number of people that you've become friends with over the years through Junior Farmers and your work. Can you talk about some of those people that you've met that have become a big part of your life?
Well, I haven't mentioned one of the real highlights of my term as Secretary Treasurer, and that was the provincial Junior Farmer Leadership Camp held annually at Geneva Park, where there were delegates from each county and district was eligible to send 2 delegates to that camp. The cost was paid by the Ministry of Agriculture and Food. The Secretary Treasurer sort of directed the camp, organized the staff, and a wonderful, wonderful group of people that in those 7 years that just gave their all to make sure that those 80 or so young people came in for a week and went home fully equipped, or much more equipped to be leaders back in their counties and districts. And I think of people like Padre Young, the late Padre Young, who was there as a staff member for most of those 7 years. Jim Purvis, the late Jim Purvis from Kempville College, and he had been on staff when I was a student there, who taught organization, how to organize programs, carry out programs. Had a music program. Forester from Natural Resources, and Jean, my wife, who had a background in Junior Farmers, went with me. We hired a babysitter, and she came for the week, and the staff lived in one of the buildings at Geneva Park. So we became a unit, and then the camp was organized in tribes, and great spirit developed to the point that there could be some rivalry, good friendly rivalry, and to bring, so people had a chance to display their talents and learn from each other. So to watch those people over the years, when they went back into their own clubs, into their own counties, and then since then to see what role many of those people played in their own communities. We talk about municipal politics, reeves and county wardens. We had a provincial minister of agriculture go through that camp. We had a federal minister of agriculture go through that camp. We had someone who ended up as the agricultural critic for the opposition party, and a radio program that was at CKNX Wingham, which was unequaled by anything in Ontario. Those are examples of people who went through camp when Gina and I were leading it. One of those people dropped in with his wife just a week and a half ago, coming up to the 50th anniversary of their marriage, and decided they would take off for a week and just go and visit around various places. They stopped in here. That person you will be interviewing eventually ended up being reeve of his township, warden of his county, outstanding Holstein breeder, wonderful family, long-time friends, lifetime friends. Dave and Miriam Barry, both very musical, both contributed at camp as staff members various times. Miriam was the secretary in the county office in South Simcoe County, and Dave went up there to be speaker at their annual junior farmer banquet, county banquet. They started dating and have been married for years and years, over 50 years now. And evidently sometime, and you'll find this out in interviewing David, but in discussing with Dick Hilliard, I think at one time Dick had said, you know, you should do something overseas. So he got involved in overseas work, and some of the things they've done in Africa are just outstanding, and you'll be interested in finding out some of those things. But just been tremendous to watch that couple in all the things that they have done, both in the province, but beyond the province, overseas work.
Tell us about one of your most craziest experiences as Secretary Treasurer.
Oh, well, there are a couple that I joke about. Going back to the provincial camp, the campers waited on tables. They took the food to the tables. So they were in the kitchen, and they took turns doing that, and Jean sort of organized that and worked with them. But one of the things that Mr. Hilliard had done when he was Secretary Treasurer and operating that camp was sometime during the week, because the staff worked so hard and were so dedicated, he would arrange with the kitchen to have some special chicken prepared, and late in the evening we would have, back in the staff building, have a special feed and chat. So one year I carried that on, and I don't know, maybe it was the second or third or fourth year. The campers evidently saw that chicken being taken over to the staff house, and at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, when we were all in bed, there was a great uproar outside. In fact, some of them even came into the staff house because the door was never locked. And they had pots and pans and making all kinds of noise. So in his pajamas, the director of the camp went to the door and said he wasn't used to making speeches in the middle of the night, but we had the great privilege of using that facility, and other people were using it at the same time, and it was very unfair to be making this amount of noise at this hour in the night. And with those few words, they all went to bed. There was no mention of it the next day, but from then on, annually, we had a chicken feed for the whole camp, not just the staff. So that was sort of an interesting experience. And I don't know whether there's anything else that was spectacular at camp.
We can come back to it later in the interview, when you, if you remember. What do you consider as part of your legacy of your work as Secretary Treasurer?
Well, I think perhaps we've already, if I have any legacy, it maybe was this ability to organize, and that sort of followed me through my whole career, and I've given you 3 or 4 examples of how that played out. I don't suppose that any one person should take credit for the wonderful leadership that the 7 presidents did after they were president of the association, and you worked so closely with them for the time that they were on the board, and in particular when they were vice president and the year that they were president. I like to think that, I suppose, all presidents made tremendous contribution after they served as president, but I would hold our 7 up against any of those. And I think 5 of them we've continued to have annual contact and discussions. I suppose another thing that one looks back on with perhaps a bit of a feeling of pride is the number of junior farmers who would come to you on an individual basis and say, I'm wondering about this, whether I should go this direction or that direction, and have a bit of a chat, and sometimes those turned out well. I'll give you one example. Don't wish to use any names, but a young couple, both who had been at camp, not the same year, married and started a Holstein herd. I was at the annual meeting of the Milk Marketing Board. Got invited every year to that. And this young fellow came up to me and we would have a dinner and then clear out while they organized for the dance, and you just stand there and talk to people for an hour. You met one way or another. So this young fellow came up and said, well, I don't know whether I should be here tonight or not. There's a farm for sale in the area. He was on a rented farm. And I maybe should be at home buying it. So I said, well, what kind of farm is it? Well, it's good land and a good barn. But he said, the house is not very good. At this point, he had a family of 4 or 5, and a wonderful wife. And he said, the house is not very good, and my wife deserves a better house. And I said, well, if the land is good and the barn is good, we can always fix the house. But if you want a professional to give you advice, we have a farm management specialist in the office. I'll give you his phone number, or you phone him if you want to. So he phoned him, and he went out. But before we finished the conversation, I found out that he had several cows, and he had $5,000. And I had said to him, well, I think you should buy it. So the farm management specialist was called, and he went out and interviewed him, and he gave him the same advice. So that couple and their family ended up earning 2 Master Breeder Shields. I was at his funeral within the last year, and I have been at few funerals when there were any more wonderful comments about the contribution that he made to the Holstein business and the number of people that he had helped get started and get on the right track and the right breeding program and so on. And that 4 of his family graduated from Guelph. One of them is in the banking business. One of them is still running the farm. I'm not sure what the others are doing, but that's been one of the most wonderful friendships and experiences that anybody could have. Another president was from Peel County, and I worked in that county. Married someone who had been on the provincial board, junior farmer board, from Haldimand County. They married, and when the Honourable Mr. Davis, Premier of the province, decided to announce that we're going to have regional government, that person was selected by Mr. Davis to be the chairman of regional Haldimand Norfolk, and served in that capacity for, I think, at least 3 terms. And he was appointed for the first one and won 2 elections after, and then I think retired from the position. That couple have been longtime friends, and we have talked about a number of things. When there was a cottage that was in their family for years and years, had been started by an uncle years before. It was available for purchase, and he knew that we had a cottage and wondered about purchasing this. I said, oh, you couldn't go wrong doing that. So they've done that. He and his brother, both graduates of diploma course, were farming together. They each had a farm, but they do doing a lot of things together. And came to me one day and said, "What? Because we've been friends all those years, wonder what we should do. The next generation is coming along." And I said, "Well, I have heard through farm management programs and speakers and so on that these partnerships work well for one generation, but when you get the next generation coming in, there can be problems. You don't have any yet. If it's possible to divide up on good terms with another generation coming on, you might consider it." So that person came back some years later and said, "One of the best things we ever did." So little things like that that carry on over the years give one a bit of satisfaction and feeling that perhaps you contribute a little bit to.
You talked about your event planning skills that you got good at and did a lot of work on. How else did your involvement in the ministry and junior farmers develop you as a person?
Well, I was a fairly reserved and almost shy type of person, and I think I still am to a certain extent, but I gained a lot of confidence and feeling that you didn't need to be too reserved. You could contribute, and there've been many things happened since I retired that sort of have brought some of those skills into play. I don't know whether you are aware of the Innovative Farmers Association of Ontario. There was a small group of farmers who had stopped using the plow and developed what they called a no-till system. And somehow or other, they got in contact with me. They were having an annual get-together, and very private kind of thing, and wondered if they could put out a report or proceedings of what went on at that conference that they could share with other people. And they wanted somebody to go and attend the conference and take notes and prepare this summary of what had transpired. Wondered if I would do that. They would pay my expenses in the motel, and I said, well, I could do that, but I have no way of reproducing it. So I came home with 34 pages and developed it down into something, and they published that. So then they decided that they would go public and invite other people to participate. Asked me to be their secretary while they would organize a program and invite farmers from all over the province to come who were interested in this type of development. So I made the physical arrangements and organized the program. Didn't chair it, other people chaired it. Met with them for 2 or 3 years following that, as Secretary-Treasurer, as they developed a tremendous membership. And then I withdrew from it, and I was not an innovative farmer. They decided they would have their own officers, and so someone who was president in one of the years that I was Secretary-Treasurer, he and his wife took on the role as Secretary-Treasurer, and they have done a fantastic job since, and have an annual bus trip to the States, which I've gone on 2 or 3 times with them. Just a fantastic organization, operate on their own with no financial assistance from anybody other than the commercial companies do donate some money for them. They have a fairly steep registration fee, annual fee to become a member. And so they allowed me to be a member for a while, even though I wasn't an innovative farmer. And I rightly or wrongly decided when I got up into the late 70s I should withdraw from these kinds of things. But there are lots of connections that I could talk for hours about. I mentioned earlier in our discussion here this junior herdsman project in Halton County that we had operating for a while. One of the things that we did was go out to George McLaughlin's farm in Ontario County, who was an outstanding Holstein breeder. And he took our group into his office, and he sat there and he just talked for an hour and a half about how he started the breeding program, his book keeping, his total management system. So that was my first sort of one-on-one discussion with George McLaughlin. When I was director of the branch, later on, he had become the manager of the milk marketing board, and he called and said, Art, I'd like to come in and see you. So he came in and he said, the milk marketing board is going fairly well, but we have to develop some kind of a better communication system. And we're thinking that maybe we should organize, or have organized somehow, county milk committees. Would your ag reps help organize those? And I said, no, George, you don't really want them to be the Secretary-Treasurer of those, do you? No. I want the farmers themselves to be the officers, and don't want the ministry involved other than just helping get the thing organized. Call the meeting to get it organized and so on. So I made a deal with him that when he would send a communication to these, the ag reps organized the committees, and a few accepted the job as Secretary Treasurer, unfortunately, and that lasted for a little while, but eventually that got transferred out. But I made a deal with him that when he would send information, any policy change or whatever, to those county milk committees, he would send a copy to the Ag Rep, because I knew that if he sent out some policy change and there was any controversy over it, the first person to go see would be the Ag Rep, and he wouldn't know anything about it. George said that would be fine. So the late Ken McKinnon followed him as the general manager of the Milk Marketing Board, and he came in one day to see me in the office, and he said, "Art, I'm going to have to stop sending out those letters to your Ag Reps. There's 2 or 3 of them that are abusing them somehow, and I don't know exactly what was happening." And so I looked down and I said, "Well, that's fine if you decide you want to do that." I had a deal with George, and the reasoning was that if there was something that needed to have clarification or advice, the first person they go to see would be the Ag Rep, and if they don't know anything about it, they can't get any help. He sat there for a minute, he said, "I think you're right. I think I can get that changed, that policy changed back, and we'll send them out." So this was a connection that sort of kind of happened by accident, but it's an example of how you get involved with someone. And take that one step further. In the period when I was retired, of course, at this time, when interest rates went to 25%, and a number of, well, some established farmers, but a number of particularly beginning farmers were just in terrible straits with the heavy debt load, and this interest rate had gone up. I got a call from George McLaughlin one day. Art, I've been asked, well, I knew he was, chair the Farm Debt Review Board. A group of people like George had been put together by the minister to try to do something about this. He said, "We need some people to do some legwork for us to verify the statements we get, requests we get for assistance. Would you be interested in doing this?" So here I am back working with George McLaughlin again. Did that for 2 or 3 years. Be put on a case to go find out the background of, make suggestions of what possibly could be done. And then someone from the board itself would, along with a couple of people to do the legwork, would meet with the farm family and the creditors and try to work out a deal to do this. And that program was didn't receive a lot of publicity, but did a fantastic service to help many people get back on their feet again. Unfortunately, I was involved in one case where a person I call a do-gooder nothing was right about anything the government ever did, so he came to the final meeting when we were making the proposal to try to salvage part of the operation for this person. He had 2 different farms, and by giving up one, we could do this. Well, this fellow went into a tirade, who was also there supposedly advising him, a tirade, "Don't accept it, don't accept it, don't accept it." And the person who was leader from the board owned, at that time, 6 farms, chicken broiler farms. He now owns 12. Fantastic person that we've been friends ever since serving on that, and he's now an honorary member of the Ontario Institute of Agrologists, because of a recommendation that we made. So we see him quite regularly, just a wonderful farm operator. And I found out after that Dutch farmer with 4 little blonde boys lost everything because that do-gooder, who didn't know beans about it, and I almost cried when the Junior Farmers Association of Ontario invited him to speak at their annual meeting one year, and I went to hear him. I could hardly contain myself. So he had a lot of skills in his own right, but advising farmers on heavy debt wasn't one of them. So those are, the kind of experiences you have when you're around for a while.
What have you done yourself since leaving the ministry?
Well, I mentioned the innovative farmers.
Yep.
I got a call, I guess it was maybe the second year I was retired, from Hugh Ayres, who had retired as the head of ag engineering at Guelph. I didn't know that well, but I knew of him and how cooperative he was, because our supervisor of the ag engineers was in his headquarters and operated out of the office there, so that we had a very close relationship. He said, I have been hired by CETA, Canadian International Development Agency, to take a small team to Pakistan to determine what, if anything, Canada should do to assist the agricultural industry in Pakistan. They have programs operating now, some assistance, but they want to know what, if anything, they should do 5 years from now. And would need somebody on the team to look at the information transfer system, or their extension advisory services, to see how it is operating. Would you be interested in going? Your way would be paid, and you would be a per diem for the time that you would be there. So it could be a bit dangerous, although we're assured that it will be fairly well looked after. So he was an engineer, and he had someone from Western Canada who was a retired agronomist, and there was someone from the university out in BC, was from Pakistan, had his PhD and was teaching there, and he was going to be part of the group to help us with translation and so on. And one other person looking at the livestock industry, a livestock specialist, who had been actually working for the Ministry of Agriculture and Food, and I knew well, who was retired. So we went to Pakistan and visited every province, and ended up doing a fairly detailed report. And I ended up doing the section on the information transfer, and also, for some reason or other, got saddled with the one on the crop side of things too. So this was a tremendous experience. 2 or 3 of the and right now Pakistan, so much of it is underwater. It's just so sad, because they have such a wonderful climate, and wonderful agriculture. There's going to be thousands of people starved to death because they don't. But saw some things that related very closely to my background. I was not impressed with their bureaucracy. It seemed to me that they had so many levels that the poor little guys that were out trying to work with the farmers had to go through so many steps to get any information, and they were tied so tightly that some of them didn't even have transportation. So one of the things that we saw, we were taken out to a very, very rural area where the small farms, farming with bullocks, no tractors, no machinery. And tradition in that area was that sons would get part of the farm, and they divided it down to the point where the farms were so small you could hardly produce enough for themselves, let alone have any to sell. So as a bit of an experiment, two young fellows who were trained in semi-tropical agriculture, not Pakistanis, had been put out in one of those areas that we visited, and they were told that they could get the information they needed any place. They didn't have to go through the bureaucracy. And in 2 years, they had doubled the production on those little farms. Just a little better preparation of the soil, a little better timing, a little better use of the fertilizer, not any extra costs, a little better variety, you know. And as an old extension worker, this was just a wonderful thing to see how these two young guys were making tremendous difference in that area. The other sort of really exciting thing we saw, 5 years before we went, they had brought some Pakistani engineers over to Canada, and they showed them irrigated agriculture in Alberta and Ontario, because there was a whole big area of Pakistan that had been farmed for generations using flood irrigation to the point where salts were percolating up from the subsoil and rendered that whole area useless for crop production, and people had just moved out. So there's this great big area of what was good farmland sitting there. So they had persuaded the Pakistani engineers over here that if they would underdrain, tile drain that land, they could intercept the salts and take them off and bring that land back into production. So in the 5 years between the time that the Pakistani engineers had been over here and we were there, they had gone back and by hand they had dug the out drains and put in tile on a section of that, and when we were there it was planted to sugar beets, black soil planted to sugar beets. And then we were taken over to a compound, and big heavy equipment for installing tile, and the Canadian government had shipped that over and had it in a compound ready to tile drain acres and acres of that land. So this was an experience I had after I retired. I mentioned the innovative farmer, that was after I retired.
And now you're living in Bayfield, Ontario.
Yes, when I was working as the director of the branch in Toronto, we would get every 5 years or so, we would get a form come around and what are your aspirations for the next term of your career. So So 5 years before I retired, I got a copy, I got one of those, and I wrote on it, "I have attained my aspirations. I intend to retire in 5 years using the 90 factor, your age and years of service, total 90. And we had been allowed to pay our military service time into the pension plan. So I put that on paper, and Jean would say, we were living in a bungalow in Oakville, "You're not really going to do it now. You're not really going to do it." I said, "Yes." Well, she decided, rightly so, that we were not going to be living in a bungalow in Oakville when I retired at that age. So she started looking for country property, and we ended up finding this 100 acres with a stone house that was gutted right back to the stone. You walked into it and all the trim was off the windows and all the plaster lath was outside, and you saw stone on the inside. No plumbing, no wiring. So at that time I was chairman of the Junior Farmer Loan Board and manager of it, and I knew the price of land in every county and district of the province, and so we put down what land was going for in Huron County, and they said, well, you have to put down at least $15,000 to $20,000 for a stone house, no matter what condition it's in. And we offered what we thought the thing was worth, and we ended up had to pay a little bit more than that. We ended up getting it. So we've had a wonderful time here. There was some orchard on it and old trees, and we put out some semi-dwarf. Jean had bees for a number of years, and the same people have sharecropped it for over 30 years now we've been here. We supposedly agreed that before we came that if either of us wasn't well, not the place to live, but it's going to be hard to give it up. Jean's a member of the Federation, we do the farming in her name, and she's a member of the Federation of Agriculture, and she's traveled all over the world because we've been able to do this. She's done some trips as a volunteer at her own expense for the Food and Grains Bank, and some for sleeping children around the world. See a whole lot of plates out there on the wall, church plates. She's spoken in hundreds of times across the province and both of those things. A week ago she spoke at the, last year she was over in India helping distribute 5,000 bed kits, and a week ago she spoke to the Probus Club in Grand Bend. Could show you the letter she got from them. So we've been able to do those kinds of things. This year she went to Nicaragua to do the same thing. She got back on a Sunday night, and on Wednesday we took off and went to the World Dairy Expo at Madison. I could tell you a story about our connection to that as well. After I retired, one of the past presidents, who was a Holstein breeder, had a daughter who had a calf that was doing really well, and somebody recommended that take it over to Madison, the World Dairy Expo. He called and wondered if I'd go with him. So we took off with this calf in a 12-year-old truck and drove over to Madison. We were 40 in the class, and she came first. So we've gone back several times since. This year, someone I knew when I worked in Peel County, who now farms up at Arthur up in Wellington County, 3 years ago loaned a calf to someone for 4-H club, and the calf did really well, and they took it to Madison. It won its class there and was all Canadian, all American. A year later it was back again, at the World Red Expo. All Canadian, all American. This year it showed as a 2-year-old in milk. 41 in the class, came first, reserve intermediate champion. So we were there to see that. Can do those kind of things when you're retired, have interest in the livestock industry.
Just a few more questions to wrap up and bring it back to junior farmers. What was the price of membership during your tenure
What was the price of?
of being a junior farmer? Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay. For the youth that have gone through junior farmers, how do you feel, just in a few points, how do you feel that junior farmers benefited them? What specific benefits did they obtain by being junior farmers?
Well, other than their own improving their own outlook on life and what's the word I want now, the confidence they had in their own ability. The big thing was their development, their contribution in their lending their leadership skills to any organization you want to mention in rural Ontario, just at local level, at county level, at provincial level. Examples, many examples of what happened to those people.
What would Ontario be like if there was no junior farmers program?
Well, I suppose there could have been other things that would take that place, but even now, it's not uncommon to go to meetings in rural Ontario where officers of organizations don't know how to conduct a meeting, and because there's a gap there that needs to be filled. And while other agencies and organizations have some programs to try to overcome that, there'll probably always be a need for that kind of training and background. And there's still enough of the trained people around to help remedy situations that develop out in the area. We attend quite a few meetings living in rural community. We go to the Federation, some of the Federation meetings. And I like to go to soil and crop events. Livestock shows are sort of a passion. And I haven't told you the story about how I got involved in agriculture. Our farm was 14 miles from the Kemptville Agricultural School, 50 miles from the Central Experimental Farm in Ottawa. When I was probably 6 years old, there was a tile drainage demonstration on our farm just before the Depression. 20 acres tile drain. I don't know what my father had to pay, if anything, or whether it was a total demonstration, but the number of people who marveled at how that changed that 20 acres and And I know that it was one of the reasons that my mother and father, with a family of 7, got through the Depression, having that 20 acres tiled and always sure of a crop on that 20 acres. Not much tiling done on the farm until after the Depression was over, and one of my brothers sort of took over, and eventually it was all tiled. But that was, there was an entomologist stationed in the village. He was paid by the Canadian government. Had a small orchard on the farm. He had insect traps in that orchard to try to determine the how they could control the insects, maybe with the natural predators and so on. So he would be coming constantly regularly during the growing season to check his traps and so on. And unknown to any of us, one of my brothers always accompanied him out to the orchard. That brother took a diploma course at Kempville, went into the degree course at Guelph, took entomology. In his 3rd year, after his 3rd year, he worked for the forestry department as an entomologist student in Northern Ontario. After he graduated, he joined the Commonwealth Institute of Biological Control, which is headquarters at that time in Ottawa. Worked in Trinidad, posted to Brazil, ended up directing the Commonwealth Institute of Biological Control. When he moved the headquarters to Trinidad, when he retired from that, was offered a chair at university in Florida. Did that for 2 years as sort of a specialist in entomology. Now retired, living in the Isle of Man, still investigating insects and writing papers and this kind of thing. His wife is from Trinidad, the daughter of a British Army major, and they had a flower growing business there. She had gone to England boarding school and university, and their family of 3 all did the same thing, went to England, ended up university, marrying, and all living in England. So now my brother and his wife live the Isle of Man, which is handy for that. An example of how you get involved in with agriculture beyond your farm. But the other example that really got me started was when I was 11, my father bought the first purebred Holstein. We had a grade herd. It was a calf, a bull calf. I made a rope halter, taught it to lead. We didn't have a car or a truck at that time. I walked it 1.25 miles to the village and showed it at the school fair. The calf did really well, came first. I didn't do quite so well in showmanship because I never had any experience, and I looked up at the horse races instead of... On the way out of the ring, the judge was the local ag rep, the late Albert Barr. Going out of the ring, he said, "How old are you?" I said, "I'm 11. You'll be old enough for Boys and Girls Club work next year." Before the next year came around, he dropped an application off at the farm. I was the oldest of 6. Well, I had a sister who was older, but the oldest of the next 6. All of us went through the 4-H program. There wasn't a junior farmer club in our township at that time when I was there, but eventually there was, and 2 of my brothers were president of that, and one of them was provincial director and was on the overseas trip. And go ahead to 1951 when I was graduating. The interviewing team consisted of the late Jim Garner and that Albert Barr. So I got a job. The first question in the interview was, why would you want to be an ag rep? And I said, I always admired the ag reps in Grenville County. Tut, 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 now. I said, I would have said that whether Mr. Barr was here or not. So it's got a little bit of a story.
Is there one last thing that you'd like to say to current junior farmers?
I have great admiration for the current junior farmers. I think it's marvelous that they do what they do without support on their own. I have gone to several of the annual meetings. They do everything to perfection. Wonderful. So I just have nothing but admiration, and I hope that they can find ways to continue what they're doing.
Thank you very much.